Here.
Mr. Floyd.
Here.
Mrs. Costick. Here. Mrs. Jackson. Here. Mrs. Wolfmeyer. Here. Mrs. Ross.
Here. Would you please join me in Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's a short one. Presentations by audience.
You got the agenda?
I have the agenda.
Okay.
I said audience presentation.
Okay.
That's, do you have something different?
No.
Okay. Okay, we are now at the place on our agenda that provides an opportunity for the members of the community to wish to address the board. As you know, we are all volunteers elected by you to oversee the development, implementation, and maintenance of the quality of education for the students of Peoria District 150 schools. The board welcomes your comments and suggestions relating to this goal, recognizing that we all have our First Amendment rights of free speech. We ask that your comments be focused on those issues within the board's authority. There are some issues we are not at liberty to discuss in public, such as personnel and other executive session topics. However, if you have a specific personal concern that need to be addressed, we will get a staff person to help you. In addition, the board members are accessible outside of these meetings by telephone and or emails and are listed on the website, psd150.org. We realize that 3 minutes may not be enough time for some of you to express your thoughts, so we have installed the comment box for your convenience as you come in the door. Our board secretary will collect those comments, and after each board meeting, share those with the board and superintendent. When you are recognized, please come to the podium and state your name for our records. Each speaker has 3 minutes, and no one under age 18 may address the board unless accompanied by a parent, guardian, or teacher without the consent of the full board. First person is Ms. Sharon Cruz.
When Dr. Kraut was chosen as the interim superintendent, board members Butler and Cloyd voted no because the selection process was not followed. From 2004 to 2010, Fisher, Hanna, Fabish, and Durflinger were hired as interim superintendents. Only Martha Ross served at the times when any of those 4 were selected as interims. Therefore, Mrs. Butler and Mr. Cloyd, what do you know about the selection process for interim superintendents? At the last meeting, Cloyd, Butler, Wolfmeyer, and Adler voted to hire a consultant to search for a new superintendent. The only reason I heard for this vote was that those board members wanted a consultant to provide an open, transparent process. My first question to the 4 of you is, to what process are you referring? First of all, 3 of you were not on the board for the selection of any superintendent. Only Wolfmeyer was serving when Lathan was chosen. What do any of you know about the mythical process? Board policy, I believe, simply states that the board will employ a superintendent. I don't believe there are any guidelines as to how the selection should be conducted. I've written a FOIA request to find out when consultants have been hired for District 150 superintendent searches. My guess is that no such process occurred for hiring Whitaker, Griffith, Garrett, or Hinton. My second question is, what makes you think that a search conducted by the Illinois Association of School Boards will be transparent? Who knows or ever will know what kind of deals are made before any applicant is presented to this board and or the public? I don't consider these questions to be rhetorical. I think we all deserve answers to these questions. Lastly, More than ever before, the superintendent of District 150 should be someone who lives in Peoria, has served District 150 in other capacities, and truly cares for the district and its employees and students. We have that in Dr. Karat. And now is not the time to waste $14,000. Also, when did this board decide that there should not be an assistant superintendent? Dr. Lathan fired her choice for the position. Board policy still lists the duties of an assistant, so what about that process? An interesting tidbit of district history. Did you know that in 1905, Superintendent Newton C. Doherty was convicted of forgery and embezzling $400,000 in school funds? Sent to prison for 6 years, Doherty was then known as Peoria's greatest criminal. In 1915, he was pardoned by then Governor Edward F. Dunn. I guess the old days weren't all that good, the good old days. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jerry Knapp? Do we have an extra pen? Extra.
I think there's some relevance to what Ms. Cruz just said about the superintendent and the money. How many of you are historians about District 150 to begin with, let alone the superintendent's positions? I don't think any of you are historians. I mean, I've been around 60 years and been part of the school district for 60 years, obviously, the whole time. And I consider myself a little bit of a historian, but I'll say this again. Do we have any historians on the board? How many national searches for a superintendent have been made? Anybody want to raise your hand and tell the public? I doubt it. Don't think you probably could. I can remember the disasters of 2 of those selections, those national searches. These people were here a brief time and literally destroyed this district. Set us back years, the 2 people we got from national searches. The people that brought in one of the superintendents didn't even vet her. You know, she got here and we found out she was fired from previous positions. It really worked. No, it didn't. It didn't work. We have a good superintendent, and we need to consider keeping her. As a taxpayer, I think it's ill-advised for 2 lame duck board members, Ms. Wolfmeyer and Mr. Cloyd, lame ducks, to select any superintendent. We have people running for your positions because you didn't want to run for your positions. Those people should be the ones selecting the next superintendent. This vote or this search or whatever you want to call it should be put off until these 2 new board members are in place. They are going to be the public's choice, not the outgoing people that don't want to serve anymore. We don't want you to pick our next superintendent. You know, you supported the last one, and it had disastrous effects. The public is behind Dr. Karat. What do we need to do? Go out and collect petitions? Why don't you tell us what to do? I walked neighborhoods the last 2 years for Mr. Adler and Ms. Jackson and other people, and I know what the pleasure of the public is. I know what the pleasure of the public is out on High Point. I've walked those neighborhoods. Have you walked those neighborhoods? Or have you just talked to the Chamber of Commerce, and who doesn't even live in Peoria, by the way, for the most part, and or the city council who selected the last superintendent? That's who selected the last superintendent. There were no people on that search committee. There were no union members. There were no teachers. There were no children. There were no adults from the standpoint of parents. There were simply a bunch of business people that wanted her to come in here and do damage to this district, do damage to its unions, not get along, and she succeeded in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Information items. Is there any response to the audience participation? Dr. Karat? Ms. Butler?
Just for a matter of record, Mrs. Wolfmeyer, when we selected the last superintendent, Mrs. Wolfmeyer was president and I was vice president, so there is another board member that was a part of that process at the time.
Anyone else? Any comments? Okay. All right. information items. We would, thought you wanted to say something. Finance, proposed tax levy.
Good evening, and thank you. I appreciate your smile and laugh there because we are in some challenging times. So I hope as I go through our discussion tonight, what I'm laying out for everybody and what I'm outlining isn't viewed negatively, but in an attempt to try to position the district in the best light that we can, given the amount of uncertainty that we're working in and the constraints we have to affect our own course. I've got basically two goals that I want to walk through tonight with a short presentation. One is to give the board, as the governing body, an update of the process that I went through as your fiscal officer in generating consensus and collaboration on where we think issues of property value growth and legislative changes would impact us, but also outline for you basically 3 policy decisions that I'll need direction from you on to take a next step, which would be a legal step of actually bringing forward a tax levy for adoption at our next meeting or the meeting in December as your pleasure. I did prepare a PowerPoint. I'm not big on PowerPoints, but I tried to make this one as colorful as I could. So here's the thing. I'm sorry. Okay.
Chris is trying to get it up, I think.
I had a rhythm. Do I? I'm sorry. We should. Recorder.
Here we go.
Okay. So basically, what I just said is that this is the levy presentation and a policy discussion overview. I tend to look towards best practices when I develop corporate budgets. This will be my 17th local government budget, and these are the standards established by a group called the Government Finance Officers Association of America and Canada. They encompass 12 elements in 4 different areas of budget development, budget engineering or budget construction. Think about the breadth and depth and scope of government budgets all the way from the federal level to the small local level, and everybody needs a process about how they go about determining what course they're setting and how they're setting it. The specific practices that we're talking about tonight are here in our revenue projections. By law, by Illinois law, we have to discuss the property tax levy here in November so that in December we can alert the county clerk basically how much we would anticipate in need from our local property tax base and what those rates will be based on specific levies. And then through discussion through the board, forward to them that plan for them to find legal compliance with and then process onto the taxpayer. I hit a wrong button. There we go. All right, I'm getting better at this. You're seeing my confidence raise, aren't you guys? Oh, it's fine, sir. We'll go. 2 things I wanted you to take from this, that I'm not just pulling, randomness into this. There are actual process elements that are best practices that I think are best used in coming to these kinds of conversations, and I wanted to give you source elements and how they were developed and who developed them. Some definitions that I'll be using, some of the terms that I'll be using tonight. Some of you are familiar, some may not be. But when we talk about property tax extensions, I'll use acronyms like EAV, which is the equalized assessed valuation, or the levy or the tax rate or extension. These are all elements of the property tax that we essentially collect. They're elements of the overall discussion, but in the end, what we're talking about is what was the property taxes that we're going to be asking for, and what are the property taxes that we're going to be asking for. But as I use these terms in the context of the conversation, here are their specific definitions. Our local revenue profile is comprised of three areas, local, state, and federal. Within each of those three, there are sub-areas that we see as revenue sources. We have what would be termed by economists as a fairly economically rigid stance, meaning that we don't have a lot of ability to influence by either product development or rate changes or revenue enhancements, as you will, the types of revenue we generate or where we collect them. We're not a manufacturer, so we can't engineer a new car and go out and try and sell it. We're a service provider, so we're left to these three areas. Within the local, obviously that's where the property tax falls. But the state comes in with our general state aid, our mandated categorical spending, and our matching grants that we use to procure title grants and our targeted incentive grants. District 150's profile specifically looks like this. So blue obviously is the property tax base. Everywhere where you see a single blue bar, the effort of that fund is 100% financed by local tax dollars. So from left to right, we're looking at the education fund, building and grounds, our debt service fund, transportation, our pension funds being IRMRF and Social Security, our local construction funds, how we repay bonds that we use to do school improvements, working cash, tort and liability, and finally our health, life, safety funds. I chose red for the state, not without irony, right? Because I would think that's where our greatest concern is. That's where our greatest uncertainty is. And as you can see in the education fund, it makes up the majority proportion of our sources. So there are nights where I lay in bed going, what do we do? And I try to think of things, how to do things differently. That red bar, or that proportion of that red bar is why. If you're wondering why there is a federal portion of in the debt bucket, that's actually federal rebates on bonds we've issued. That's a good program, that's a good thing. That's actually meaning that we're using federal borrowing sources and portions of those borrowing sources coming back to fulfill the debt. Those would be things like about 5 years ago, ARA funds being returned to districts and residuals therein. Some of the material, and by the term material I mean major, assumptions that I've used in developing the grand budget that we'll need include local property growth or EAV growing of about 2%, a little bit over 2% actually. The way I go about doing that, the way any good fiscal officer does going about doing that is we're not the building permit people, we're not the construction people, but we have ears to the ground and we have conversations with the folks in the building industry and the folks in the assessor's office, and we talk to those professionals and those technical professionals and find out what they're feeling and what they've actually felt throughout the year, whether they felt it was a strong year, activity was weak, whether compared to last year and this year it was anemic. We look for terms like that and probe those out. By and large, I've felt that there was a conservative resistance to saying that it was actually a fairly good year in growth. You know, you can wordsmith that all you want, but what it comes down to is that there's some growth that we're just not sure how much of, and we don't want to be on the record of saying it was great, when in actuality it was good. For my planning purposes, for the district's planning purposes, because of some of the items that we discussed with Dr. Phillips last week, I believe it's a wise stance to continue to take a posture that GSA will continue to be prorated, and that our categorical funding will remain flat within the context of us being able to maintain our effort in that regard. Maintenance of effort is a whole nother conversation, but I'll just say that we're going to maintain our effort in that regard, and we'll make ourselves eligible. Whether or not SB 318 takes full form as was described last week, I'm not, again, being conservative, I'm not ready to pull that trigger yet. I think the threat of freezing everyone's property taxes across the state of Illinois is bold. It's a bold move, but it also is devastating in its effect just by sheer volume. There are over 8,000 units of local government in the state of Illinois, more than 2,000 next to the second place of Texas in the country. And you're talking about the primary source of funding for almost every one of these, and telling them that for the next 2 years, you're not getting a raise, and we're not going to tell you how to do anything differently on how to generate revenue. All that being said, I think the element of Senate Bill 318 that presents itself in its most weak form is that it contains a commitment to re-engineer how GSA is calculated. Whether or not that's linked to or lynched to or tied to the actual property tax freeze is left to our legislative advisors. But they've given themselves basically 2.5 years to rewrite GSA. And I think it was pointed out by Mr. Cloyd that it was in the paper 20 years ago that they were talking about rewriting GSA, and now they're saying they're going to do it in 2 years. I just don't see it happening. So as one part of the bill starts to fall apart, obviously you can see that other parts of that bill may find itself in less stability as well. Any questions to this point? Okay. So our primary local source, obviously, then is our real estate market. We have a couple of different areas when we talk about EAV. We talk about residential growth, we talk about industrial, commercial, railroad, but primarily with most areas, we're talking about our housing units and our housing stock, which is why I use these cute little houses. From 2005 through 2015, this is basically how it's grown. We've seen 3 to 6% growth, and then you see that we actually dipped under there in 2012 by about 8%. You know, you only win or lose on a house when you sell it. So some people haven't even felt any part of this other than through their property taxes and how those have been readjusted going from year to year. But I would say this is actually, by some comparisons, not a bad picture. I've seen dips in some of the collar counties where that 2012 or that 2011 picture were in double digits. In some cases, 25% drops in their local residential markets. So for us to start seeing growth again, which I think we will, The county assessor thinks we will. The building market thinks we will. I think is a fairly significant achievement, which is how I got to this. This is basically your property tax calculation laid out for you from left to right. On the left, starting with your educational operations and maintenance and going down, you have your individual levies and what we collected in the prior year. So, for instance, our prior year extension in the educational fund was almost $29 million. In the operations and maintenance fund, it was $6.6 million. Transportation, $2.7. Working cash was $0. Municipal retirement was $2.9. Social Security was $2.7. Fire prevention and safety, $665,000. Tort immunity, $6.4 million. Special education, $531,000, and then our leasing levy at $665,000. Using the numbers up above, just off center, the consumer price index is projected to grow by 0.8%. If we were in that property tax cap environment or the Senate Bill 318 environment, that would be the limit of our growth, notwithstanding new construction. So that's how I constructed this scenario. I believe that we're going to see about $5 million in new growth, which our total changed in, when you look at our estimated total EAV for 2015, at $1.36 billion, would be 2.38%. Is everybody comfortable with that math? Okay. So moving from left to right, what we're saying is that our maximum tax rates, those levies where we're sitting at the 2.81 or 2.18%, the 0.5%, those are all maxed rates. We're already doing the most we can in those areas, maximum effort. Those will grow by 2.38% because they're linked to the property value growth, the EAV growth, automatically. Where you see input for manual override, those are what are called uncapped rates. Basically, where the legislators have said you basically levy for what you expect to spend and no more. Those with municipal retirement, Social Security, and I put those at about 5%, because if we are frozen for 2 years, I'm not saying salaries are going to increase 5% in each year. I'm saying if they increase 2.5% in year one and 2.5% in year two, we should have enough to cover it, compounding through both years with that strategy. And then taking tort immunity from 6.4 to 6.7 is a similar approach. What we're trying to do is, again, not overreact to Senate Bill 318, but position ourselves as well as we can to the uncertainty it presents. Finally, the last piece on this that I want to point out is statutorily, there's a formula that our bond counsel has advised we are pegged at in our working cash fund. So we currently have on fund balance reserve about $37 million, a little over $37 million in working cash. The statutory calculation would be 35. While we're over that statutory calculation, we're not allowed by law to levy for working cash, which is why you see in the prior year extension that there's a zero there. So my recommendation to the board would be to consider moving that excess out and designating it for emergency or one-time capital purposes in health, life, safety, so that we could then reestablish a working cash levy and then have that on the books as 318 rides out.
You have a question?
Yes, you said that we couldn't levy for working cash?
As long as we're above the statutory peg.
Okay, thanks.
Is that a fairly new policy? Or-
If I
Because
could,
we've had that for a long time.
we've had,
Yeah, you're saying the statutory limit. That's only relating to whether or not we can levy for working cash, right?
the district hasn't levied for working cash by the records I've reviewed
No,
since
I know.
2004. Okay.
So as long, if we wanted to levy, then we'll have to lower it, you're saying, by statutory requirements. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. That's been the advice given to me through Chapman and Cutler. And actually, one of the first conversations Dr. Phillips and I had about how to establish that levy.
So I guess my question is, when we levied the last time, the 37 million, it was to have a reserve so that when our cash flow got low, when we're waiting for property taxes and that, we had a place to go to just for cash flow and then put it back. So what would be the purpose of levying for more working cash, and what will we do with that?
You'll still have that working cash available to operate as it's operating currently, because you still have funds go in the negative balance throughout the year.
Right.
Ms. Wolfmeyer, are you assuming that how we got the working cash, we levied for it?
No, I'm just saying that 37 million is there. What I'm asking,
But it can't, I don't think it's because of the
Well,
levy.
but we're talking about levying for more working cash. I mean, isn't that the purpose of moving the excess out, is so that we can levy for more working cash?
Yeah, so you get under the peg, then you can levy, is that?
Yeah.
That's the
Right,
strategy.
so, but my question is, what are we going to use, if we levy for it, what are we going to use that money for?
Working cash needs, which are to meet the needs of other funds.
Yeah.
I mean, still is just a borrow and put back type thing and build
Yes,
that
ma'am.
fund up more? Is that what you're wanting to do?
Essentially, yes. You'll have this conversation as you accumulate non-principal in the working cash fund. You can have, let's say you generate through collecting 600,000 in 3 or 4 years from now, you would have $2.5 million in there again, above the peg. You could have that discussion again and say, by law, we can move that money out to the fund most in need.
So even
But-
like the education fund, or wherever it's most in need.
Correct. The reason the sole reason I'm doing it this year is because of trying to optimize our response to Senate Bill 318. I don't want to leave a levy on the table that we could address through this discussion, and then be handcuffed for 2 years and not have enough to work with going forward. Looking at our cash flow needs through the spring, the district hasn't had to go through tax anticipation notes for quite some time. But with accumulated deficits, I don't know, again, without having completed a full projection, I don't know that this year or the year after might not be a time where you re-enter that need. So having that levy in place theoretically forestalls that need to go out for tax anticipation notes, which is what the position you want to be in. In my previous district, we went out for tax anticipation notes every spring. Every spring.
We used to do that too.
That's why we finally sold the bonds
Yeah.
for the working cash.
Well, now, my question is, when you said if we move that money, could we use that in the education fund? You know, every year we have to pink slip teachers. And then we don't always get them back, like this year. So, is that can that money be used to, you know, kind of float those positions until we get our general state aid or whatever?
My recommendation was the Health Life Safety Fund, but your options are the Education Fund, the Building and Grounds Fund, which would then transfer to Building and Construction, or the Health Life Safety Fund. But I would caution that no operational need is tied to that transfer, so that you're not creating or sustaining positions with the transfer, if that makes sense. You're not paying salaries with working cash funds. That, I don't think that's good policy.
No,
But there are capital needs, in the education fund that we could address with the transfer, and then use that money that would otherwise have gone to those educational capital spending needs to other needs as well.
I was just looking for clarification on like the pink slip deal, because that always hurts us every year. That's the only question I have.
Okay. Debt's going up slightly as well. Our last year's bond and interest was slightly over 16.5 million. This year it's slightly over 17 million. I believe your debt service schedule you currently have about $148 million in outstanding debt, all of which I believe is satisfied by 2032. I'm doing that off of memory, though, so please be kind.
I don't care about me.
Okay, so some of the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, the popular SWOT analysis of what we've been talking about, sort of getting to a conclusion and maybe turning it over to you. I think that the property tax base, when you compare it, particularly when you compare it with others, withstood the brunt of the recession, and it looks to rebound. Even though the board and staff adopted a budget in deficit, it's as conservative as can be, and I know from our purchasing practices and conversations with our administrators, the conservatism by which almost every purchase is being reviewed. We're trying to do everything we can to bring that E in line with R. That's about as algebraic as I can get. But and then that monitoring establishment that we're going through, so that we're going through that month. You guys are getting that monthly communication that's meaningful to you, so you as the governing body understands what those changes we're seeing from month to month. And then as we go to the quarterly plan and the quarterly reviews, obviously you'll have a much richer conversation about what we have on our horizon to deal with. Weakness or an opportunity for improvement, however you want to look at it in light, it was that red bar, right, that we've got almost 48% of our education fund reliance is on general state aid and state aid in general. Our second then would be on an over-reliance on our property tax base, that we just don't have a way to diversify from those three those three sources. And then at this moment of the conversation, because we're actually moving into the discussion of a long-range plan, which is excellent, tying spending and tying budgets to long-range plans is so critical to organizational health. And Dr. Karat and the team has done such a wonderful job over the last 2 months I've been able to watch of creating a really robust document that's going to help the finance team understand better where those allocations are made and where those dollars and returns on investment can be made, that'll help the board make those decisions, so when pink slipping time comes, you'll have hopefully less to think about in that regard. Opportunities, obviously, we're looking for more green grants, and we do have that feeling, and we have heard that the community support is strong at this point, and we're going to try and continue through our means of communication and our actions to support that, both how that community support is engaged and how we keep them up to date on what's going on. And then finally, the threats within that is just a generic spending without strategic focus or eyes on revenue. I don't see it here, but I have seen it in districts before where, this was the budget that you established last year. This was the line item you gave me, and I'm spending every penny of it. That's not how we're approaching this budget. That's not how we're approaching our spending. We are truly making those asks of what's in the best interest of the child when dollars are being spent. So, summary of the changes, and I apologize for the length of the conversation. As you can see, in response to Senate Bill 318, I have a resolution that I would prepare, or has been prepared for you, for your review. You could adopt it as early as next week, or you could hold it over for the first meeting in December. We would still be on our legal timelines. The board's aware that we have to file with the county clerk by the Thursday after Christmas. Second to that, we would restrict any use of any working cash fund sweep to one-time projects of emergency or health, life, safety need. And then third, that you would accept the levy as I presented it and direct my staff and myself to prepare the legal documents to effect its extension. And I'll come back to this. The question everybody always asks, how does it impact me? So I started 100 and go up to 300. And this is one of those charts that makes me pine for my days in city government, right? When we were 8% of the tax bill because we didn't have to tell the owner of a $100,000 home that their property tax bill would go up $67 because of the constraints that we face and the proportion that the school district takes up of the total tax bill. But this is how it plays out based on what we're looking at and the recommendations being made. And then, so tonight, we'll conclude with the policy discussion, provide me with direction, and then you can, as I identified, we can move forward next week or hold over for more deliberation or back and forth in December. Either is fine with me.
Any other questions for Mrs. Bush? Ms. Wolfmeyer?
I just want to be sure that I understand what you're asking. So are you only asking us to change the levy on the working cash? Or are you asking us to increase the other ones that we can?
I'm asking you to make the working cash change and accept my recommendations on IMRF and Social Security that they're going to go up based on a threat of a 2-year freeze and tort as well.
Okay.
And that my assumption on the growth is sound.
Okay. And those are the only ones that we can do anything with, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Those three. Because I think it certainly sounds like many of the governmental bodies around us are starting to do that exact thing. I think it was the Chillicothe Park District increased their levy by 69% Saturday morning in anticipation of the Senate bill. So, I mean, everybody is looking at doing this, and, right.
I want to be as respectful to Senate Bill 318 as I can. I don't want to over or underreact. And I think what you're seeing here is me trying to calibrate for you exactly what we're facing, what we're talking about, and how I think we've designed an appropriate response.
Other questions of Mr. Bush?
Mrs. Ross, I'm wondering if also for the sake of conversation, if we could extend perhaps Dr. Phillips the opportunity again to perhaps maybe add something that wasn't in his previous presentation that goes along with what Mr. Bush has spoken to us tonight.
I'm not sure if Dr. Phillips, would you have anything to add? You all have been talking to each other.
What exactly were you asking me to add?
I wasn't asking you to add anything. I would say perhaps if you wanted to add something from your last presentation, knowing that the two of you correctly have been working together, but
Right.
Based on this conversation tonight and some of the questions that did come up.
Maybe Dr. Phillips, the working cash question for Mrs. Wolfmeyer, some clarity on
I
that.
can't hear you.
The working cash discussion.
No, I
question.
think I
Was
understand,
that-
yeah, my
okay.
questions got answered, yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, you are correct that all taxing bodies are now are looking at the very same thing that District 150 is looking at, trying to, position themselves for this legislation that may happen, even if it doesn't happen. And there's a chance that it won't happen. There's not a great loss. It's like preparing for a storm and you buy extra food. Well, if the storm doesn't come, you have extra food. And you can eat the food as time goes on. But if you don't prepare for the storm and you don't have the extra food, then there's that. So, the discussion with working cash is very valid. In my opinion, districts like 150 that have the ability to maximize their rates, including working cash, should do that. And that's what he's suggesting that you do to move some money out. As far as raising the rates in the flexible rates of IMRF and Social Security, that's sound logic right now. I think it is anyway. What you're talking about is what districts throughout the state are talking about and thinking about and making decisions at virtually the same time that you are, because this is the time frame to make these decisions right now. And looks like, you're talking about it now, and you have, maybe next week would do the actual levy itself, and then the approval of the levy will come in December. So I'm not sure, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes.
But, all these things are wrapped up in looking for the future of the district for the boys and girls, and that's really the issue here. And sometimes these decisions can be difficult, and to do these things when you're not sure of what the future is. Even unsaid, even though Eric mentioned it, the future for money from the state of Illinois is very problematic. What the district has been promised, as well as other districts in the state, I do not think will happen at the rate that they've promised right now. So it's very difficult to budget months ahead of something that I'm pretty sure is going to happen. It happened last year. They reduced the rate of general state aid 2.25% in April, unbeknownst to anyone. And that presents a problem in future planning. So you have to plan now for the best that you can. So sound projections, difficult decisions, but best for the boys and girls.
One more question, just for clarification. By raising the levy in the Social Security and IMRF and in the tort, those new monies that we get from those levies can only be used in those funds, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
So it's not like we're going to raise money that we can move into any other funds. And you explained the IMRF and Social Security would be to cover any increases that we're obviously going to see. And then the tort has many things that can be used for, but it has to stay in that tort fund, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Which one of the funds, I know that we have been allowed to move monies from one fund to another. Is that the O&M, that we've moved money before from transportation and O&M into education and that? Are there others that the monies can be moved?
There are a
We
few.
got special permission, I think.
There are a few you can move monies to and from based on need, but generally the designated purpose, transportation levies are supposed to be used for transportation funds.
Not necessarily the levies, but the dollars that we've been getting, for transportation. At one point, we were very positive in the black, and we were told.
I've heard of other districts doing that as well. I've never seen it.
Okay.
The three main funds, education, operations, and transportation, have the opportunity and the ability to make unlimited permanent transfers between the funds, really at any time. That's a bill that's been sunsetted and redone and
Right.
sunsetted and redone for about 15 years. So there is that ability. And of course, the working cash can loan to any fund, basically.
Yeah, there's can and should, I guess is how I would lead that.
Right.
Okay.
Quick.
Yeah. Mr. Cloyd.
Thank you. Mr. Bush, I did my own work on this a little bit. There's no intention to reduce the rate on the lease or the life safety funds at this point?
No.
Okay, so they would stay at the current rate. So none of the current rates would be reduced?
None of the current rates would be reduced.
Okay.
The only scenario, well, there are two scenarios that I would envision even presenting something like that. One would be if I wasn't faced with Senate Bill 318. Then I could look at fund balances in tort, fund balances in Social Security, and fund balances in IMRF, and say, based on your expenditure patterns and your expenditure behavior, you could actually reduce your rates there and pull from fund balance and still meet the same demand. But with the threat of 318, I wouldn't even think about it. Reducing in health, life, safety, we know whether that number's 10 with A and B or 15 with A, B, and C, we know we have more needs than we have in both reserve and incremental dollars received. So I need every dollar of health, life, safety, even though it's not helping much, it's helping some.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting you would. I just, when I did this, it looked like the numbers came back down a little bit based on the EAV and the rates. So that's an error in my calculations. But
Okay.
two other things here. One of them is, does this include the return of the Southtown TIF district to the EAV?
It was my understanding that that return occurred 13-14.
Okay, so it's already in place then?
It's already
So-
in place.
So that doesn't, so it's already been absorbed back into the tax base?
Yeah, the TIF increment on 14 was 42.9 million, where the TIF increment for the 13 tax year was 63.5. So that means that the smaller TIF increment in the later year represents a return of increment to you.
Okay, thank you. I guess that covers it for the moment. I know this is a tough thing to do, so I appreciate your work and your staff's work on this. This is a lot of mind-numbing detail you have to go through to pull this stuff together, so thank you for that work.
Yes, sir.
Other questions for Mr. Bush or anyone else? No other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bush and Dr. Phillips. Next is the discussion around making a formal request to the city council.
I guess I would ask for direction to move forward with bringing you an
Okay.
adoption of the levy next week and a resolution for the working cash shift? Or did you want, as a board, to carry that over to the December meeting?
Well, since it's not an action item, well, we can do a consensus, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Could we possibly consider that after we have some further discussion here? Because I think that may have an impact on the overall picture just a little bit.
Further discussion here tonight, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just for tonight.
We'll come back
And then,
to-
if we could, before we leave this evening, we'd want to give you some, I would expect we'd give you some direction here, not
Okay.
just to walk out, so,
Okay.
Excellent.
yeah.
Who's discussing the city council? You?
Would you like me to? You have in your folder there this evening a draft letter to the mayor, members of the city council, and the city manager. And this lays out a request by District 150 to the city council to consider a quarter-cent sales tax for the purpose of funding state-mandated maintenance and repairs to our school buildings. It's a fairly lengthy letter. There is a typo on the third paragraph there. That should be 100,000 and not 10,000 in the last sentence of the third paragraph. I apologize for that. But the purpose of this is to lay out the reasons for this request, provide some background on our finances. It talks about Senate Bill 318, talks about the pension shift, and it talks about positioning the district, as Dr. Phillips mentioned last week in his very thorough presentation on this issue. Then finally, the other issue that's coming to confront us and others in the community is the stormwater utility fees that will be required of all residential, commercial, and institutional property owners in the city. And then finally, the issue of why would we want to do this and why would we request this? And that is the sales tax is paid by those who purchase goods in Peoria, and it is not a burden on property tax payers. And I know that the city is very cognizant of the impact of what we do in terms of the total tax bill for property owners in the city of Peoria. This is one of those things that has been done in other communities, some in the area. And the idea here is that a quarter cent sales tax would generate something on the order of perhaps $1.5 million annually for District 150, which my understanding would be that because of their enrollment in the city of Peoria, that the Dunlap School District would also have some legitimate claim on a portion of that based on their enrollment, which is about 20% of the total enrollment in the city of Peoria in public schools. So the point here is that if we could generate perhaps $1.2 million in sales tax revenue, that would allow us to issue bonds for health, life, safety purposes and construction of things that take care of health, life, safety requirements by the state of Illinois. And I think Mr. Bush indicated that at the rates that would be prevailing for a 20-year bond, we're talking about perhaps $15 to $16 million of bonding, which would cover a portion of our current requirements and possibly allow us to do some other things in a shorter term. So the idea here is that the City Council has an opportunity to avoid us having to do some things with health, life, safety bonds that will be only a burden to the taxpayers and property owners of the city as opposed to doing something on the sales tax. We've had informal discussions with the city on this issue over time. I don't think the city leadership is particularly thrilled with this idea, but tomorrow night the City Council will be considering a number of ordinances, including one that will raise the city sales tax by 0.25%, and that would be used for road and street maintenance in the city. So my thought here is that if they're going to do this, and we're going to try and approach this in a way that says, look, we have an opportunity to work together here, this is something that the council needs to consider. And so for that reason, I'm suggesting that we take this letter and we provide it to the leadership of the city and the city council, and then be prepared to respond with any questions they might have. This is the first time, I believe, this district has approached them formally on this issue, and time is of the essence here because they do have an ordinance that they're working on right now, and they're going to have it on first reading tomorrow night. So with that, I don't know what else to say, but this is one approach that we might consider. And as I say in the last paragraph here, or as we say, the issue before the city council is what can be done to minimize the impact of Illinois' dysfunctional school funding process on Peoria's property owners. And we realize there are no good alternatives, but perhaps this is one way to approach it. And we would do so with respectfully requesting that they would consider this concept.
Any questions, comments?
I absolutely agree, and thank you, Mr. Cloyd, for taking that step, because if they say they want to help us, then they should.
Is this just going to be handed to them?
Well, I would hope that we would send it to them electronically first thing in the morning,
Okay.
simply because of the time involved. And I know that Dr. Karat has given the mayor notice of this discussion this evening as a courtesy, and hopefully that they will be, there was a mention of it in the newspaper in this morning's article that we were going to be considering this, and it was on the agenda, so it's not a surprise, but still we wanted to make sure they knew that we were thinking about this issue.
I guess my question is there going to be a presentation made, or are we just going to send electronically and then give them the written?
Well, I would just send it electronically, and then if we need to, we could appear, a couple of us could go to the meeting tomorrow night and be there to answer questions. I think when they have an ordinance on first reading, they have to consider it and then come back, and I don't know how many times they have to present it, but I think it's at least twice, so that it's going to cause some discussion, and we could respond to it.
I think a request had already gone out for any board member that could attend. Is that correct?
I think that someone should be there to speak, though, in case there's questions asked, but I really think we ought to be there if we're asking
Yeah,
that.
I would be happy to show up and be prepared to answer questions. And
Anyone else?
I don't anticipate making a formal presentation, that we'd make a formal presentation.
I intend to be there.
Okay. So we have two board members that will be there to answer any questions or,
So this is
okay.
uncharted waters, but the boat's leaking and we got to fix it.
Okay, as a result of the letter, and how do you see that, Mr. Cloyd? How do you see that
I would ask,
acting related to the request from Mr. Bush? Said you wanted to.
well, my point here was that if we have the opportunity to do this with a sales tax, it means that we may be able to do some things, or at least avoid doing some other things on the issuance of health, life, safety bonds. If we have to issue health, life, safety bonds, it adds to our debt burden. I just passed that chart on to Mr. Bush. I think our total debt service and lease costs peak, and what's the year where that's peaking?
2025.
And the total amount is over $21 million a year in debt service and leases. So anything we can do to avoid having additional debt service and lease costs over a long period of time would be great. And if the sales tax, in effect, pays for that amount of bonds, it would avoid us having that much debt service for 20 years. In other words, it's paid for by the sales tax rather than out of our property tax.
So that would be the bonds that we'd sell, but not the levies.
Right.
Right. But if we issue health, life, safety bonds, we do not have to have a referendum for that. And if Senate Bill 318 passes, as according to Dr. Phillips, the deadline for getting that done would be March 1st. So if we have the need and we don't issue them by March 1st under Senate Bill 318, it would have to be a referendum at that point?
Yes, you can sell the life safety bonds as long as they've been approved with the 3 required pieces.
Right.
The architect, the regional office, and the state board.
And,
Once you get that, then you can sell the bond.
and we have, what, $15.5 million approved at this point, Mr. Bush? And your estimate of how much we really need to be looking at over a period of time was substantially more than that, as I remember from your memo.
I'll just go with yes.
Okay, that's good enough.
Well, and I think my point is, though, that in the discussion, that the sales tax really doesn't have anything to do with
what this requires.
our decision on directing him for the levies.
Exactly.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right.
That's correct. But when we start looking at what the impact is on property taxes, and then if we issue health, life, safety bonds, it would be on top of this levy, so that it would add to the property tax bill, in addition to what we're talking about here. That's,
Well, that's quite a few ifs, but
Well,
of course, some things are time sensitive, like the need to.
And I guess also, what I'm trying, if, we know we need 15.5, we need that 15.5 million. I mean, with the health, life, safety stuff we have to get done. So with the sales tax, it's a drop in the bucket, to be honest with you.
the sales, you issue those bonds for 15 million, and the sales tax pays the annual interest and principal on them for the next
Okay,
20 years.
But I'm saying is, we wouldn't necessarily issue less bonds.
No.
Okay,
No.
I mean, that's what I thought you were saying, is that if we get the 0.25% sales tax, then we wouldn't have to issue as many bonds
No.
for the health, and that's what I was trying to get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me clean that up.
No, I understand
That's
I
actually-
understand what you're saying
That's
now.
actually a very good point, because just because we have approximately 15 million in approved health, life, safety projects, that's just the portion of the project that is health, life, safety
Right.
approved. The actual architectural cost of the project in total could be more. And
Right.
almost every instance is. So, for instance, a roof project could be $2 million, but the health, life, safety qualified portion of it is only 1.8, leaving the district to come up with 200,000 through some other mechanism.
Okay.
So when you ask me, what is the remaining out there, I would say we're looking at a total of anywhere from 40 to 60 million dollars in work. In
That's
total,
what I thought.
Yeah.
And these aren't-
district-wide,
These aren't
on a
our
20-year plan.
choices.
Right.
So-
These are mandates. What happens if we don't do
So-
the health, life,
The
safety?
the entire premise of this request to the city council is we're going to have to issue some bonds to fund health, life, safety projects. Do we want to have the cost of that added to our levy on real estate, or do we want to have it paid by a
Okay,
sales tax?
I understand.
That's
Okay.
the question.
I got you.
Okay?
Okay, yep,
Thank you for the
yep.
helping me clarify that. I would ask our secretary that we would clean this up and get it in electronic form and on letterhead and get it in the hands of perhaps the council or the clerk of
I was going
the
to
clerk.
say, you are going to send it to each council person, not just to, like, the city manager.
Right, it would go to
Yeah.
all members of the council, the mayor and the city manager individually. And perhaps the clerk of the city council could do that rather than us do that distribution that way. So there's one document.
Well, that may not happen. So I recommend that we send it to each board, each council member directly, along with the mayor, so everybody gets it at the same time.
I would recommend that, too.
Okay,
I think we ought to send one to each one, yeah.
all right, we'll do that then.
Going back to my question, I wanted to just make clear that the health, life, safety issues are not issues that we can ignore and still operate. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that it's not something we want to do. The state has said this has to happen, otherwise we can't use those buildings, right? Okay. So why don't we take this one at a time, as far as the consensus. And give us a statement, Mr. Bush, on what you want us to have, what you want to have consensus on.
The first item being direct staff to prepare a resolution to affect a sweep of working cash funds out of working cash to the fund most in need at the, to the statutory level.
Okay. Ms. Wolfmeyer?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Ms. Costick? Mr. Adler?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay. And the next one?
Is to direct staff to prepare the 2015 property tax levy extension and associated notices as presented.
Okay.
I'm a yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Ms. Costick?
Yes.
Mr. Adler?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Cloyd?
Yes, and I have a question after this, too.
I'm also a yes. Your questions?
If we do issue health, life, safety bonds, what is the, let's say they were issued in February of next year, when would we be able to add that to our property tax levy? Would that take place immediately, or does that have to go through the next cycle?
That's actually a very good question. I mean, if it was February, you're really making it tight on the clerk. We would have to be very on top of it and make sure that we get those extended up for July, for the first installment.
Okay.
But that's really, in my mind, pulling it.
The bonds could also be structured so there's no interest in principal to the first 12 months, too, so you could do that and
Correct.
take it over there.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different, structures you could engineer in that regard, absolutely.
Okay,
but
and then we could
it-
catch it up in the next levy after that.
Correct.
Okay.
But there's a cost to it, doing it that way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're clear on, these are consensus, not votes, so.
And then the third would be to direct staff to prepare both for presentation at next week's meeting.
Okay?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Ms. Costick? Mr. Adler?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Cloyd, and I'm a yes. Anything else, Mr. Bush?
I would like to thank the board for the discussion, and I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next item we want to have consensus on is to distribute the letter to the city, the mayor and the city council and all appropriate individuals that has been, it's going to be coming from the board. Any other discussion on that?
Just that I would note that there's a typo in there and it needs another 0 in that number, so we'll fix that.
Let's put it like this, that distribute the letter after corrections, after any corrections or wordsmithing. Ms.
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Ms. Costick?
Yes.
Mr. Adler?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Cloyd?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So you would work with the secretary of any
Yes, ma'am, I will do that.
any typos that need to be
There's
redone.
only one I'm
I will
aware
be
of.
happy to sign that tonight, and it can go out in the morning. I believe your name is on it too, you can sign. Anything else on that, the issue? Okay. Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee update, Ms. Jackson and Ms. Butler. This seems to be on the agenda.
Yes, it's just a very quick update at the request of Dr. Karat. We had a very exciting meeting last Thursday, and Mrs. Jackson can add to this as well. As you know, in October, we held our first Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee meeting, and that was to establish that we had the mandate from the state that we would review the policy changes in regards to discipline from Senate Bill 100. and that we are just that an advisory committee reviewing what the policy committee will look at in accordance to that bill. So we did that in October. Also at that October meeting, those who were present, again, there's parents, teachers, and community stakeholders. We had a very insightful conversation regarding parental involvement. So that issue was brought back to the committee on Tuesday, last Thursday. And out of that committee, there will be a subcommittee that will not only look at how parents can be even more involved, but the various ways, and it's just not information, but looking at what we can hand off to administration for actual involvement, giving life to some new things for the coming maybe summer or school year of 2016. Mrs. Jackson, would you like to add anything?
I just like to reiterate what I said in the meeting, and that is, we talk a lot about this. Now it's time to get down to work and get some things done and get some things written down and some proposals of what direction we want to go. I think we've been talking about it for a very long time, so it's time to get to work.
Yes. Michelle Coconati is the interventionist that will be leading that committee. Mrs. Jackson is on that subcommittee as well. And our next meeting will be December 10th at 5 p.m. in the media room.
Okay, thank you. Some suggestions that I would make, I've been, over the years, this has been something that I've worked on and tried to get parental involvement. So I tend to believe that we will have to go outside of our regular avenues to be able to get parents in. So I have had some conversation over the years, and most recently with the administrator of Department of Human Services, as at least one segment of the of parents that we may have required to do do volunteer hours monthly, and I have spoken with them, and they're very open to having District 150 be an approved agency. So further talks will be, with them, where if they have to, are required to do and mandated to do 20 hours, I believe now, I was told 20 hours a week by the administrator. If that is so, many of those hours could be spent in our school district and in the child's school, those parents that have children in the schools. And they were, they thought it was a great idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're doing those in several agencies now, those work hours or whatever, and they could get credit for spending time with their parents, with their children in school, and not necessarily in school, but they could do playground duty, they could do lunch duty, reading type buddies, several different ways. I mean, there are ways they do that in other areas where if they get online and check their kids' status, their grades and that, and they do an email back and forth to the teacher, they get credit for that. And individuals don't necessarily have to be with the Department of Human Services to do that. That's how I wanted to work with businesses to promote parental involvement.
One of the things that Dr. Karat spoke to in the meeting was we have great, we do have parental participation, involvement. It looks different in different ways because the fact parents are getting the kids to school because of our attendance rate. But the one thing that Dr. Karat challenged the committee with was really defining what is parental responsibility, who is the parent? And so who really does have influence on that student, being an older sibling or the person next door who's really bringing them through that process, that they also are involved. I don't know if you would like to say much more to that.
Yeah, parental involvement could be really ambiguous. When you look at our report cards, and you look at the parent contact piece, it's actually very high, 92%, 93%. So what we talked about was really providing more clarity in terms of what it is we're expecting what's the expectation of parents? Are we expecting them to come to school and be room mothers? So we talked a lot about that. So what is the expectation? And we talked about Joyce Epstein's research. There are 6 types of parental involvement. And so we actually talked about using that as a guide.
Right.
So it's exciting, but more clarity is needed, for sure. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
And thus, parent involvement will affect what we're largely there to talk about, which is student discipline.
Yeah, and, you know, we've got to be conscious of the fact that some parents work jobs that they can't get off and come to school.
That's why
And
we
how do
have to
we,
meet
how
them
do
where
we
they are.
put all that in there? Or parents that work a 3rd shift or those things. And there are a lot of different things that we've got to think about. And I think most parents want to be involved. It's helping them understand and put a schedule together so that they can follow that schedule, assist them in organizing and doing some things that will be helpful. But then, you're right, who's a parent who's a person that will be involved in the school? Because it could be an aunt, a grandparent, it could be a brother or sister, but somebody that knows what's going on, that's working with the teacher, so.
So
And I
different.
think, and I think that, you know, it's about changing the culture as well, because for years, I mean, as long as I can remember, my kids graduated from here. The oldest is 50, and as long as I can remember, they spend a lot of time keeping parents out of the schools. So now we have changed the culture and have them welcome back into our schools, and but with a purpose, as you said. So the parent university was created, you know, to try and do some of that, you know, educate our parents, but the ones that we really need to be there are not necessarily there all the time.
And I'd just like to add one more thing in regards to the Senate Bill 100. Mr. Cloyd provided us with the document as the policy committee is putting together a heat map looking at what things or policies are affected by this Senate bill and what really is not. So again, we're following the policy committee in reviewing what comes out of that committee, and still waiting to hear from General Counsel as well as the state on some of the recommendations of what to do with this bill. So that's where we're at.
So I think, a big takeaway was one size doesn't fit all for our parents.
Yes.
And trying to find which
What we
type
want
of
them.
parental involvement is a perfect, as good, you know, the best fit for them, whether based on work schedules, whatever it is. So that was a nice discussion.
And then also to what Dr. Karat has been talking about recently, looking more at the social emotional office piece that goes along with this, and expanding more in the involvement of counselors and social workers in the schools as well.
Anything else on that issue? Thank you for the update. Strategic plan update.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. There's a quick PowerPoint, and I just wanted to thank the board for initiating the strategic planning process. This is really an important piece, an important document. Ms. Jackson mentioned earlier, I just wanted to get done, and I want us to, for the most part, quit talking and start putting things to action. And this happens in this document, and then this document serves as a guide for us. And board, you started this, and when I came on board, I remember Mr. Cloyd talking to me about it, and I asked for notes, and he gave me quite a wealth of information, and which I appreciated. And so this evening, the purpose of this update is just really to give you an update, and then to solicit feedback from you as we move forward. You should have a copy of that presentation. I sent it to you. So let's see. So this is the path that we've been on this path for some time. and I just wanted to share the planning process, kind of review it quickly. There were 4 meetings. Those meetings were held on Tuesdays, and based on the research that I did, and I spoke to a couple of you, the topics were identified by board members, right? And so each meeting, there were about 3 topics. For example, January 6th at Peoria High, you talked about safety and security and district facilities and so forth. And the second forum, there were 4 forums that were held, Richwoods High, the focus again, community relations and communications, employment and volunteers, and fiscal responsibility and so forth. There was a meeting at Manual on February 3rd, and you talked about traditional academies and career and technical education and potential new forms of organization for the district overall. And there was a meeting also on the 17th in this building, and then as a result, well, okay, and then all of the 9 topics were discussed. So in terms of community, I won't read this to you, but I stumbled on this letter again, putting all of the pieces together, and I really appreciated that letter. I don't know if it was sent. Did you receive that letter? Okay, and actually I found it to be very helpful as we were progressing in this process, the strategic process. This letter, we ask for feedback, right, as a district, and this was one of the comments that came back, and it was really good. They were making sure that we were focused on performance excellence, for example, and not too much on not being punitive. I don't know if you probably can't see it, but they talked about staying away from punitive measures and safety and security matters that overshadow any goals of providing quality education for kids. And I really appreciated that. And then they gave some recommendations. But the point here is we have received feedback from the community, which is, this document, it's not just a District 150. From my mind, I would like the entire community to take responsibility in building this document, and so that shared vision really must be encumbered by everyone, not just us, but all of the businesses and our partners. And we've worked diligently on getting feedback from a variety of entities. So again, board, you gave us, staff and you gave us those 9 goals, and we worked with the 9 goals. I remember starting maybe a week into the position, and I know this guy, Dr. Brushko. He's a professor at Bradley, and he's known for strategic planning and assisting. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, hey, this is where we are, and I just wanted to pick your brains and get some guidance from you. And we had a really nice conversation, and he said, Karat, there are too many goals. So they look really pretty. There are 9, and you can see the topics. And so I'm like, okay, we'll work with that. I'll work with my team on it. And you can see we have a district leadership team. We have community individuals who were involved. We have individuals we've gotten feedback from Caterpillar, from the CEO Council, EDC, from even the City Council. I sent it to a variety of individuals, and Illinois Central College, some individuals from Bradley University, staff. We sent it to as anyone who really wanted to get, to read it and provide feedback. And you can see in January, for example, the priorities were created, and then in September to now, we've discussed the goals. They were collapsed. Remember those 9 goals? We actually surveyed staff, created a survey for staff, and I said, hey, team, these are just way too many. Which ones do you think I would like you to prioritize the topics, the ones that would have the highest impact, right? And so a staff basically did a survey, an anonymous survey, and came up with 5, what we call the 5 big goals, or the 5 pillars. And so you can see in September, principals were asked to prioritize the 9 topics. And essentially, again, as I said, is tell us the ones with the highest impact as it relates to moving our school district from good to great. And then in September, we worked on it regularly. After they conducted the survey, it was analyzed, the goals were collapsed, we drafted targets, we wrote actions, and we're working on considering the matrix. And even on November 3rd, our team we participated in Illinois Central College's apprenticeship workshop, and there were a number of businesses there and a variety of individuals representing a wide span of entities, including police, fire, and social service agencies, and we provided the draft to them and also received feedback from them. So we came up with this one-page sort of a quick summary, and there's the vision and our mission and our values and the position statement and the 5 pillars, one having to do with high standards and rigorous college and career curricula and engaged and relevant experiences. Again, high standards. The high standards are important for us. Rigorous is important. We also want to focus on college, not only college, but also career. And so that's why it's instead of curricula, so it's both of them. It's a twin. Those kids who do want to go into college through the IB programs and the AP classes and the college preparatory routes, that's fantastic. And a huge focus on those who want to move from school to work, with a lot of support via apprenticeships and internships and those sorts of things. Then Pillar 2, Reverend Butler referenced a system of support, which is really key. It will cover that safety and security piece that was just so predominant, it was just sort of like outstanding. But when we're doing this thing, we want to focus on what's going to, we have to be in zone 3. We talked about being in zone 3, where we're being bold and we're being creative and that type of characterization, systems of support, and that goal will take us to that level instead of the other punitive piece that person referenced when they provided that feedback for us. And then the 3rd pillar has to do with committed and effective leaders, teachers, students, and staff. And then engaged family and community and is the 4th one. And let's see, this is not a really good copy of that. But all pillars are available in draft form, and actually they're currently online for our families and our community to provide access. It's on our website, and you also have a copy of it, but I would like you to take a look at, let's see, we've just updated it today. You have to click on download. It's a little slow, but we have the pillars, and then we have what we call targets. You'll see targets, and then we'll have measures. And the really nice thing also, we kept, when you went through the forums, there were huge ideas and topics that the community, that was really important, and pieces that was really important to the community and individuals who participated, and we used those to create this document. So let's go down further, and what I would like to do is click on the, Okay, let's hang on for a minute. So here are the 4 pillars, and financial and operational stewardship is the final one. So you can see, really, pillar or goal 1, high standards, rigorous college and career curricula, and engaged. This is important. Kids have to be engaged, and it has to be relevant. And then systems of support, committed and effective leaders, teachers, staff, and students, engaged families and community, and this is what, again, we were talking about through Senate Bill 100 and parental involvement piece, and being bold and creative, doing things differently around that idea in order to get different results. So let's scroll up, Mr. So here's pillar 1, for example, and you can see we kept the community and district priorities. Those were the directives we were given, and we used those to create the targets. And for example, under pillar 1, there are 5 targets. 1 is to implement the new learning standards, and 2 is provide differentiated and responsive professional learning opportunities for staff. That is very, very, very important. As leaders, we not only monitor, but we support, and we provide the necessary support that staff, that our staff needs. So this is important. Number 3 has to do with technology, using technology and reconceptualizing technology for learning and instruction. Number 4 is a biggie for me. It's huge. Restructuring schools throughout districts, throughout the district to meet the varied needs of our learners. And 5 also provides alternative learning experiences for students. So here's some measures. You can take a look at it, and there's another, we have it in a one-page document, or maybe a 2-page document, but things like curriculum audits, instructional technology review, and you can kind of see the number of internships and apprenticeships, for example, would be a measure to, as part of our scorecard, the number of IB diplomas given, number of students taking AP tests, number of dual enrollment and passing, number of students enrolled in dual classes and also passing. Hopefully, the goal is to see that increase year after year after year. And this is a 5-year, right? From 2015, 2016 to 2020. Percentage of students enrolled in 2-year or 4-year college within 1 year after graduation. And then the idea is it's cyclical. You plan it, you do it, you check it, and then you make adjustments if necessary. Can we, yep. And then we have the action plans. So each target is broken down into a couple of action plans. So for example, under the new Illinois Learning Standards, we would review and evaluate, and we would ensure explicit integration, for example, and application of 21st century learning tasks. So you can kind of see, implement a quality balanced assessment system. So here just for 1.2, a differentiated and responsive professional learning opportunities for staff. You can see some of the actions that we would put in place. For B, for example, provide PD on developing high-quality classroom assessments. F, engage all students in grade course-level content. And let's scroll down to 1.4. So 1.4 has to do with restructure schools throughout the district to meet the varied needs of learners. And here's some, the idea is to be bold and to, again, in order to position our district to be a premier, high-quality institution, create, establish, implement a STEM-focused middle school, create, establish, implement an embedded career-focused learning in all schools, redesign grade level configurations, reestablish fine arts magnet programs at Roosevelt and Peoria High, review and redesign our school calendar. For example, purposes such as summer school and extended learning opportunities. Those are some items also that came out from the community priority. I remember seeing things like balanced calendars, year-round school, that sort of thing. Evaluate and redesign options for earning high school credits and dual credits. Partner with community organizations, businesses, and ICC to provide opportunities for internships and apprenticeships. There's a big push in our community also to move in that direction, and I think it's the right direction to go to move into, in terms of, I call it a differentiated academic programming. Let's see, review and redesign early learning structure, and then reconceptualize, redesign, and establish high school opportunities through a pathways approach. There's a big need in our community for example, manufacturing. I hear in our research and our statistics, it shows we have jobs in our community in the health sciences area and even in the manufacturing area, and the goal is to prepare our kids, and these are great middle-class jobs, for example. So we're really focused on creating those pathway opportunities, the internships, the apprenticeships, in order to get those individuals who do want to take that path onto that path. Provide 1.5, the target is to provide alternative learning experiences, and then you can see the actions underneath. Evaluate effectiveness of current, so we'll evaluate the alternative learning that's going on right now. We'll explore and develop additional alternative learning experiences, and we do need more of those. Provide extended learning opportunities for identified youth. Work closely with community agencies to provide for students' needs. So that's pillar one. And you have all of that. I don't know how much of that you want me to go through, but this one, since this is new for us overall as a district, systems of support, that's relatively new. Establish an effective office of social learning, social emotional learning. Let's see, assess the effectiveness of our current school district multi-tier system of support, utilizing discipline, attendance, school safety, data around non-academic factors to learning, identify and address social emotional. So this all has to do with social emotional. Provide targeted, ongoing, culturally responsive professional development for strategies to increase effectiveness of current behavior management and social emotional plans. The measure, that's what Dr. Zaleski and the new software that you approved last week, we'll be able to do that with ease. Create district climate, percentage of students entering kindergarten with, so you can see some of the items we would use as measures. Count of discipline referrals for major and minor, and actually the team recommended that I separate the two, and we can do that. Count of in-school and out-of-school suspensions, including subgroup average daily attendance, dropout rate, and you can see again the thoughts from the community and how that influenced the not only the goal or the pillar, the targets, and the measure. And we scroll quickly. And as I said, you have, is this what you were thinking? Is that what you had in mind in terms of, okay. Mr. C, can we scroll down to the scorecard, please? Oh, okay, so we are going to continue to solicit feedback because this is, it's still sort of fresh and in its embryonic stages. So November 19th, there will be a parent university at Woodruff, starting at 5, and it will be a topic of discussion. I will have a roundtable, and I'm anticipating getting additional feedback from the community and from parents on November 19th. So I'd like to invite everyone to attend that. And then November 30th, we'll be meeting with our district PTO council, district-wide, our PTO presidents and vice presidents, and the PTO leaders or individuals in leadership positions, and we'll have a conversation around the plan and solicit additional feedback from them. And then on December 1st and 3rd, I'm having what I call the superintendent roundtable, and it's open to anyone in the district, and they can come and sit and have a conversation with me, again, around, it's an opportunity for them to sort of provide feedback on the draft. And the idea is to, if it's okay with the board, it can be postponed, but the idea is to present a document to the board for approval on December 14th. Can we take a look at the scorecard, please? Okay, it's kind of tiny. Let's see. Do you have your copy in front of you? Yeah, it's not on there. Yeah. But there are 3, and it's small, is it? This is it. Okay. It's actually in page, you don't have it? But, let's see. I will send it to you, and I wanted some feedback from you around this piece. Actually, on the end, we have 3 options, and there are 3 categories. One says students, district, and staff. And you'll see the measures, and then we have targets, and we'll compare the previous year with the current year. And then we can, I wish that was a little larger. Do we have a larger one? Yeah. Because I wanted us to talk about it. Any feedback so far, board? I wanted to thank the team, though. It's a lot of work, and we're still looking for feedback.
The PTO council, has that been a while since we've had anything like that?
It has been a while.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you.
And obviously, a lot of work has gone into putting this together, too. That's very apparent.
Thank you. I've had a lot of support from the team, Susan, Diana, Carla, Eric.
It's quite a daunting task when you come into something that's already handed to you.
The AIOs, Ravonda, Jerry, Angie, Michelle, Ms. Hammer, Mike, who else am I not seeing? Chris. Except I like that, I really fell in love with the scorecard. I wanted the board to see it, but. Hey, let's see. And so that's option 2. That's like not the one that I really like, but it's okay. It has the pillars, and they're not in any numerical order, but you can see the measure, things like curriculum audits, assessment inventory, district climate surveys, attendance rate, And you can see where we were last year and the target, with 100. It's an ambitious goal, but we're going for it. Graduation rates would be a measure, percentage of freshmen on track to graduate. You can see where we are currently and the targets, percentage of third grade students meeting projected growth targets. That'll be based on NWA, percentage of first grade students meeting, percentage of kindergartners entering, number of grow your own. There is a need for us to grow our own teachers. We would like to dabble with that and work on that. Percentage, so you can sort of, even wellness and satisfaction reviews, that's important. Some celebrations would fall under that. And so this is number of IB diplomas, number of students taking AP test, I talked to you about the dual credits, and hopefully we'll see an increase over time, number of internships and apprenticeships. So that's just a start, and we're definitely open to ideas. And you should have that. If not, I'll make sure. If you don't, let me know. But I know a lot of you were interested in this piece, so we're looking for feedback from the board regarding the scorecard. Regarding the scorecard, yes.
Okay.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Copeland.
Any questions of Dr. Karat? There's a lot of information. It's good information.
Is that timeline okay?
Mr. Cloyd?
Thank you. I guess the two things I would ask about, these are rhetorical questions, not looking for a response right at the moment. Number one is, we're going to be faced with some difficult budget decisions, and if there's significant things here that have a price tag on them that we're not contemplating today, we need to know that, and doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we need to set priorities and say what's important and what is more important, and do that. Number one. Number two is mindful of our discussion in the strategic communications meeting the other day, the cascade of programs and things that are being done during the school day and after the school day by the professional teaching staff. Let us hope that this does not add to their burden of doing their jobs, because they've got their hands full, and I think they've suffered through a number of years of more of everything without anything being taken off their plates. So it would be great to have some feedback and say, okay, these are all wonderful things to accomplish, but if we have to do something, do we stop doing something else, or what are the trade-offs on these issues? And that's not a simple discussion, and it's certainly not one that's done in 5 minutes, but it's one I think that needs to have some real time spent on it. So
I think I would just like to, just apropos to that, the Turn Conference that Ms. Jackson and I attended, that was the very focus of us, doing things that we've always done that don't work, continue to do things and add to. So I think we have to take a real look at refocusing and, as you said, reconceptualizing. And that does mean taking out some of the things that may not be working right now. That was a real focus there, too.
Thank you. I would like to actually ask Mr. Dutro, he's a member of the district leadership team, to really make some remarks, if you may. I hate putting you on the spot. You've been sitting for a while. So, and
Check. Yeah, to that point, we have, for the first time, I think in a long time, been included in the strategic planning process. So, that's always, you're absolutely right. We're always thinking what is most important and how can we streamline things and also synchronize things that we're trying to do so everything works as one. And with research, another thing we're extremely happy about, that we've been asking for, kind of demanding, I guess, fruitlessly for a long time, but it's going to happen, is an actual survey of teachers, not only teachers, but it's significant to us, teachers, with regards to the different assessments and programs the district has been doing. And these surveys are going to be done, not, an email goes out and respond if you want to. It's going to be part of a meeting at a school, so we'll have solid numbers and we'll be able to make solid decisions based upon, feedback from the professionals in the classroom. So we're really excited about that part of it.
Thank you.
Anything else for me?
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Karat?
I don't have any questions, but the feedback I've gotten, especially from the teachers, is that they're really happy with being included. And they're willing to do whatever they need to do. And when we talked at the Turn Conference, whatever they need to do to get things done. So that's exciting.
Thank you. Mr. Adler?
I would just thank Dr. Crott and staff for obviously a large amount of work put into this plan, and I think there's been a sense in the community that there's momentum moving towards a new path, and I appreciate the sharing of the culmination of the thoughts. I think as community members, and I sat in a room with everyone here back in February, trying to think about how we would go from those 9 very high-level topics to something that was actionable. I think it was a tremendous amount of work on your part. So thank you. And I also would mention that a number of community stakeholders are looking for what we're going to do differently, that, that this board and this leadership team will, stand out. And I think some of those highlights, including the STEM-focused middle school, are the things that catch that eye and are appreciated. So as we firm, I'm sure we're going to communicate, but look forward to that conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Costa?
Just a real brief question in regards to the community feedback. Looking at your timeline, if, for instance, we're looking at the Parent University roundtable, for the community feedback, are we looking at getting information back from the roundtable discussions as well as the PTO council meeting discussions? Are we looking for information to come back before this comes to us? Because it seems like your timeline, I want to make sure that you've allowed yourself enough time in order to be able to put together the information. So I am kind of concerned with that timeline.
Yep, we are flexible with the timeline. It is on the website right now, and it has been since September, is it? Late October, and we have gotten feedback. We've given individuals hard copy of it, and so what I was going to do is, it would be interactive, and so what I found is, if you send it or you give someone a hard copy, they may not have the time to go through it. A few are able to do that, but if it's interactive and we sort of go through it together, then, so it's almost like kind of being in a class and in an engaging format. So we're going through it pillar by pillar. So once we're finished with that, for example, that Parent University roundtable, there would be no homework.
Okay.
That was the thought. And the same thing with the PTO council. And another idea is we could send it to them ahead of time. Let's do that. That's a good idea. Send it to a PTO council. We know who they are. We can do that with that group. We don't know who will show up for Parent University, but so there are different formats that can be utilized depending on the venue.
Did that answer your question?
I know with teachers, we sent it to them, and I'll be happy to send it again, because we've progressed since, and get some additional feedback from them. Sorry, Ms. Roth.
No, I was just going to say, this whole strategic plan has been out there now for a very long time, and we've made it accessible to anyone and everyone that wanted to have feedback. And the narrowing down of this, I think, is just a culmination of everything that has been brought to us over almost a year now, right? When did we start? February?
January.
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 So yeah. But any additional, and it can be fluid, where any additional information will probably tie into some of what's already written somewhere. I would think so.
We can go into the first of the year, December 14th. We have one board meeting in December. So we're fine. We can, so it's,
Well, we said we wanted it by December.
That was the impression I
that was the
Yeah,
target.
why don't we see what it looks like at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of a semi-final draft.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Presentations and suggestions by board members. Any suggestions? No. Okay, reports from board committees. We already have a report from one committee. You have a report?
There's a meeting tomorrow.
No, not at this moment. We have a meeting scheduled tomorrow, the policy committee.
Anything else for the good of the business?
I have one question. That was, we got the package from the IASB about the search process, and there's a timeline, which would be good to have a first cut of what that draft timeline looks like, if we could get that next Monday. Do you think that's possible?
We will have that next Monday.
Great.
I've been in contact on a regular basis with our contact there, and that's what we're working on.
Great, thank you.
Any other suggestions or comments? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.